Hello and welcome to Sharp Angle. On this channel, we don't just repeat headlines. We take them apart, explain the moving pieces, and show how they land on your life as an ordinary American. Today's story sounds technical at first, but it goes straight to the heart of what kind of country we are becoming. In the last few days, Washington has moved to expand federal immigration detention capacity, including a new facility planned in Nebraska, far from the southern border. For some politicians, it's a talking point. For contractors, it's a business opportunity. But for families across the country, it's a signal. The machinery of mass detention is being normalized, not at the edge of the map, but in the American heartland. Let's start with the basic question. Why place a detention center in the middle of the country? Officials will say it improves logistics, moving people quickly to courts, flights, and medical services, relieving overcrowding in border facilities, and spreading the burden so it doesn't crush Texas or Arizona alone. The political logic is different. If detention exists only at the border, most Americans can pretend it's a distant problem. Put it in Nebraska and the message changes. This is a national system, built to be permanent, funded by you, and operating in your backyard. Once poured in concrete, these places rarely go away. They grow. Now, I'm not arguing that a nation shouldn't control its borders. Every serious country enforces the rules at entry. The question is how we do it, what we build to do it, and what the downstream costs are. It's easy to sell a new facility as security. It's harder to talk about the bill. Construction, staffing, transportation, medical care, court processing, and the long tail of contracts that lobbyists will protect for years. Those costs don't vanish. They show up in budgets, and budgets show up in your life, in what your school, your town, and your hospital don't get because something else did. There's also the credibility piece. If the United States builds a visibly larger detention machine while promising that everything will be humane, efficient, and temporary, the rest of the world notices the gap between rhetoric and reality. Partners hedge, adversaries test. And here at home, once the system exists, the temptation to use it more broadly grows. History is blunt on this point. Tools of control rarely shrink on their own. They search for new justifications. Today it's immigration. Tomorrow it can be national security, public order, or whatever the next panic serves up. What does this mean for your wallet? First, energy and food. Immigration enforcement, like any large federal build-out, moves markets. Contractors staff up, supply chains reorient, states compete for federal dollars. That raises local demand for materials and labor. Meanwhile, heightened raids and transport operations can disrupt farms, meatpacking, construction, hospitality, sectors that Americans depend on every day. Disruption doesn't magically raise wages. Often it raises prices. You meet those prices at the checkout line and the gas pump. Second, credit and insurance. Investors don't love policy whiplash. Sharp swings in enforcement create sharp swings in risk. Lenders price that risk into the loans that fund small businesses and home purchases. Insurers price it into premiums. If uncertainty runs high, if supply chains get spiky, if labor markets get choppy, if protests flare and policing ramps up, you pay a volatility tax without anyone calling it a tax. It leaks into your mortgage rate, your car payment, your homeowner's insurance, and your grocery bill. Let's talk about the human piece without euphemisms. A detention center is not a paperwork office. It cells, locks, cameras, intake rooms, and families separated by fences. Even when standards are followed, the experience is punishing by design. The point here isn't to deny the need for process. The point is to be honest about what we're building in our name. If you raise kids in a town where the skyline includes a new federal detention complex, the lesson those kids learn is simple. We solve problems with cages. That lesson seeps outward, into schools, into local policing, into how neighbors look at one another. Supporters will say the alternative is chaos, that the border is overwhelmed, and that humane ideals don't matter if the system is breaking. Two responses. First, chaos is often the product of under-resourcing the boring parts that actually work. Staffed ports of entry, modern case management, timely work authorization so people aren't forced into the shadows, and enough immigration judges so cases move in months, not years. Second, a concrete-heavy approach creates its own chaos, fiscal, legal, and social, that you pay for long after the cameras leave. Consider the legal pipeline. Every expansion of detention capacity needs a matching expansion in due process or the backlog explodes. If the courts don't keep pace, people sit longer in custody, costs rise, and pressure builds for shortcuts. Shortcuts lead to mistakes, and mistakes lead to lawsuits that taxpayers finance. We've run this movie before. It ends with bigger budgets, not better outcomes. Zoom out to community impact. When a federal detention hub opens, the surrounding area often sees a surge of low-wage contracting. Security, food service, transport. Some local leaders celebrate the jobs, but the opportunity cost is real. Every engineer or nurse who chooses a contract desk over a clinic or a startup is a quiet loss for long-term growth. And when a town becomes a node in a national incarceration network, the brand sticks. It affects who moves there, what businesses invest, and how young families plan. Now, about the political theater. You'll hear talk about painting barriers, darker, flying drones higher, erecting more razor wire, symbols that look tough on television. They don't move the needle on the real drivers of migration: violence, failed states, climate shocks, and demand in the U.S. labor market. But the symbols do something else. They train voters to equate strength with spectacle. That's bad governance. Strong policy is quiet, boring, and effective. It rarely fits in a campaign ad, but it does show up in your monthly bills. There's a digital angle, too. In the same political ecosystem that builds more cells on land, you often see efforts to fence off the internet. New rules that restrict platforms, narrow speech, and expand surveillance in the name of safety. Some of those measures may be justified. Many are clumsy. The pattern is the point. Tighten the physical space with detention, tighten the information space with regulation. Together, those moves reduce the room ordinary people have to navigate, organize, and protest. Less space means fewer checks on bad policy, which means more bad policy makes it through. Let me get specific about household timelines. Over the next year, you might renew a lease, refinance a mortgage, buy a used truck, or launch a side business. All of those decisions lean on stability, stable fuel prices, predictable shipping, steady interest rates, and a labor market that doesn't swing wildly. A detention-first approach promises order but often delivers turbulence, sudden raids that empty work crews, court bottlenecks that delay paperwork, policy shifts that hit supply chains in unexpected places. Turbulence shows up exactly where families live, in higher quotes, slower service, and fewer options. If the aim is genuine control paired with fairness, there is a smarter path. Expand legal pathways that match real labor demand so fewer people enter irregularly. Staff ports of entry to shift the flow into regulated channels. Use case management. Instead of cages for low-risk families, it's cheaper and compliance rates are high when people can actually get to court and access counsel. Add immigration judges so we measure wait times in months, not half-decades. And coordinate with states so communities aren't blindsided by overnight transfers with no resources attached. None of that sounds dramatic. It won't trend on social media, but it does the job, and it keeps the United States closer to the country we say we are: confident, lawful, and free, not nervous, punitive, and addicted to spectacle. If we're going to spend billions, spend them on the parts that reduce chaos, not on monuments to it. Let's anticipate the counterpunch. Isn't it naive to talk about case management when cartels are ruthless and smugglers are organized? No, it's pragmatic to separate high-risk actors from families seeking work or refuge and to focus resources where they actually stop harm. A dragnet looks tough and catches headlines. Targeted enforcement looks boring and catches criminals. Choose effectiveness over theater. Think, too, about our reputation. The United States sells two products to the world: innovation and the rule of law. When we build new detention hubs far from any border, we undercut the second product while doing nothing for the first. Universities, tech firms, and hospitals depend on an America that looks open and predictable. If we look closed and arbitrary, talent goes elsewhere. That's not ideology. That's the market making a judgment. There's a deeper civic issue here. Democracies are maintained less by slogans than by habits. Transparent budgets, boring hearings, inspectors general who actually bite, and courts that move cases without fear or favor. A detention-heavy approach strains those habits. Secrecy creeps in. Oversight gets harder. Journalists find doors closed. When visibility shrinks, errors grow, and with them the likelihood of abuse. You don't have to assume bad intent to predict bad outcomes. You just have to assume human systems behave like human systems. So what should you watch over the next 3, 6, and 12 months? Watch procurement. Who gets the contracts and on what terms? Watch the court dockets. Are wait times falling or ballooning? Watch local budgets. Are towns getting support for schools and clinics, or just traffic and sirens? Watch your bills, fuel, food, rent, insurance. If the story is stability and order, you should see stability in the numbers that govern your life. If you don't, you're paying for a show, not a solution. And finally, watch the language. When leaders switch from speaking about people to speaking about problems, from names to numbers, that's a tell. It's easier to fund a system that treats people as inventory. It's also easier to expand that system to new categories when the wind shifts. That is the slope democracies must resist. The slope from emergency to routine, from exception to policy. Here is the bottom line. Building a detention complex in the heartland won't fix what's broken by itself. It may buy a photo op and a headline. It will definitely buy a pile of invoices. The smarter path is slower, less theatrical, and more adult. Expand lawful channels. Speed up honest adjudication, target real threats, and stop pretending concrete is a substitute for policy. Strength is not the loudest image. Strength is the quiet competence that shrinks chaos instead of staging it. You don't need to agree with me on every policy detail to see the stakes. This isn't a left-right sermon. It's a kitchen table. Question: do we want to pour billions into a permanent architecture of cages, or do we want to invest in the parts of the system that actually work and make our lives more predictable? One path buys fear. The other buys stability. Only one of those pays you back. Thank you for watching Sharp Angle. If this breakdown helped you cut through the noise, do the usual YouTube things. Like, subscribe, and share, and tell me what's happening where you live. Policy doesn't live in Washington press releases. It lives in your rent, your receipts, and your calendar. We'll keep following the story and, more importantly, we'll keep following the numbers that show whether any of this is actually making America safer, freer, and more prosperous for the people who do the work of keeping it running. A note on courts and compliance. Programs that pair case managers with families, provide reminders, and ensure access to counsel routinely see high court appearance rates without detention. It isn't mercy, it's management. When people can navigate the process, most do. When the process is a maze, we shouldn't be surprised that people get lost inside it. On economics, think about opportunity cost. A dollar that goes to razor wire doesn't go to port modernizations that reduce wait times for trucks or to grid upgrades that keep your lights on during heat waves. Those investments tame prices quietly for years. Razor wire tames nothing. It sits there, demanding maintenance while solving little. On state-federal relations. When Washington drops a facility into a community, it often hands mayors a bill for roads, policing, and emergency rooms. If the federal government wants local buy-in, it should attach funding for the externalities it creates. Otherwise, the politics turn sour and the costs get hidden in local taxes and hospital fees.